My name is Dorothy Rogers, and I'm 31 years old, but the story I'm about to tell you began long before success, before money, before anyone in my family even remembered my name at the dinner table. I used to think every family had a golden child. In ours, her name was Michelle. 3 years older, effortlessly charming, with the kind of confidence that came from being adored since birth. My parents didn't even try to hide it. Every conversation, every framed photo on the wall, every proud smile, they all pointed to her. I wasn't mistreated, just unseen. I was the background blur in every perfect family picture. At 12, I had already mastered invisibility. When I brought home an A in science, my mom barely looked up from cooking. That's nice, honey. But when Michelle aced her history test, it was an event. See, Dorothy, that's how you focus on your goals, Dad said once, turning my sister's success into my lesson. I remember nodding silently while washing the dishes, listening to Michelle's laughter echoing in the background. She always laughed loudly like the world was hers, and she knew it. Christmas was the one time we were all supposed to feel equal. Gifts lights the illusion of togetherness. But even that had hierarchy. Michelle's presents came in big boxes wrapped in ribbons, mine smaller, simpler. I had stopped hoping long ago. Then one Christmas morning, something strange happened. An envelope sat under the tree with my name on it. Inside was a check $1,000 from Aunt Sarah, my dad's sister. Michelle got one too, and for the first time we were the same. My mom smiled. That's generous of Sarah. You girls are lucky. Michelle squealed already, listing what she'd buy: boots, a jacket, a game console. They all turned to me. What about you, Sam? Dad asked. I stared at the check. The paper felt heavy in my hand. I think I'll save it. Dad laughed. The kind of laugh that carried disbelief. You're 12, sweetheart. You don't need to save, spend it, have fun. But I didn't. That same week, I opened a savings account by myself. I remember the bank teller smiling politely, probably thinking I was just a kid pretending to be responsible. But it felt powerful, like I was finally keeping something that was mine. That decision, so small, so quiet, was the first choice that wasn't influenced by anyone else. And I had no idea then that it would define the rest of my life. From then on, every birthday, every Christmas, Aunt Sarah sent another $1,000. Michelle's money evaporated within days while mine grew quietly dollar by dollar. When I was 14, I got a part-time job at a cafe down the street. Weekends spent cleaning tables, refilling coffee, counting tips in the back room while other kids went to the mall. I didn't mind. I liked watching the customers the way they ordered, without checking prices, the ones who paid in cash, the ones who hesitated before swiping their cards. Even then, I was curious about what separated people who had from people who wanted. By 16, I had nearly $10,000 saved. That number felt unreal to me, a small fortune earned from patience and coffee-stained aprons. I started to imagine what I could do with it, but I also knew I couldn't tell my parents, because in our house, everything, even fairness, eventually circled back to Michelle. When she was 17, the conversations around dinner turned into endless college talk. Fashion design, Michelle said, twirling pasta around her fork. My mom clasped her hands like she'd just heard a wedding proposal. Oh, that's perfect for you, honey. You've always had an eye for style. Dad nodded. We'll cover tuition, of course. We've been saving for years. I froze. Saving for years. For Michelle, I looked up quietly. Do I have a college fund too? Dad didn't even look at me. We'll figure that out when the time comes. And that was that. Michelle got certainty. I got later. That night, I sat in my room staring at my bank book. $10,000 stared back at me. Money that was mine, but suddenly felt small. I remember whispering to myself, if they won't invest in me, I'll do it myself. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. The kind that burns quietly like a match, refusing to die out in the dark. A week later, something Mr. Johnson, my economics teacher, said stuck with me. Money that just sits still loses value. Let it work for you. He said it casually, but my brain wouldn't let it go. That night, I found myself sitting on my bed phone in hand, heart pounding as I dialed Aunt Sarah. Hi, Aunt Sarah, it's Dorothy. Her voice warmed instantly. Dorothy. How are you, sweetheart? I'm fine, I said, hesitating. Actually, I wanted to ask you about something, about money. There was a small pause on the line. Money, she asked gently. Yeah, I've been saving what you sent me, and from my job, too. I have around $10,000 now, and I want to invest it. For a long moment, there was only silence, then a low, amazed laugh. 10,000, Dorothy, that's incredible. Most kids your age can't save $10. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I just don't want it to sit there doing nothing. She told me she'd talk to Uncle Mike and call me back. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking, what if she thought I was being silly? What if she told my parents? What if they took it away? When she called back the next day, her voice was firm. Your uncle and I talked it over. We want to help you set up a trust fund. You won't be able to touch the money until you graduate college, but it'll grow. And Dorothy, her tone softened, we'll add another 10,000 to it. I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt from my own parents' belief. Thank you, I whispered. You remind me of myself at your age, Aunt Sarah said. Quiet but stubborn enough to change your fate. When the call ended, I sat on the floor, staring at the reflection of my face in the phone screen. The girl looking back wasn't invisible anymore. Somewhere between ignored dinners and saved paychecks, she had turned into someone who could shape her own destiny. I didn't know what I'd build yet or how, but I knew this: I would never again wait for their approval to feel worthy. And someday they would realize the quiet one they'd overlooked had learned how to turn silence into power. College was supposed to be the start of adulthood, independence, freedom, belonging. For me, it felt like walking a tightrope between two worlds, the one my parents still controlled and the one I was quietly building for myself. By the time I was 18, my trust fund had grown steadily under Aunt Sarah's guidance. I didn't fully understand interest rates or compounding returns yet, but I knew that every dollar I didn't spend was a seed for my future. Meanwhile, Michelle had become a walking celebration. She was 21 and studying fashion design at a private college my parents were proud to go broke for. It's an investment in her talent, Dad said once while writing another tuition check. When I got accepted into a finance program on a full scholarship, Mom barely looked up from her laptop. That's nice, honey, she said, the same word she'd used since I was 6. Then, after a pause, she added, at least we won't have to pay for yours. I laughed, not out loud, but inside where no one could hear. I should have been angry, but all I felt was distance, like I'd already started to detach from a version of family that no longer fit me. College was hard. I was surrounded by students who never worked a day in their lives while I waited tables at night and studied between shifts. But I didn't complain. I was learning things that made my brain light up: investment strategies, financial modeling, portfolio risk. The numbers spoke to me in a way people never did. They were predictable, honest. Sometimes during lectures, I'd picture Aunt Sarah's face. Her eyes always kind but sharp, as if she saw straight through the world's noise. She called every few months to check in. How's our little investor, she'd ask. Still learning, I'd say. And she'd chuckle softly. Good. Keep learning. The world respects those who understand what to do with what they have. It wasn't until sophomore year that I started my internship at Morrison & Associates, a small investment firm downtown. The pay was non-existent, but I didn't care. I wanted experience, not sympathy. The office was clean and quiet. Glass walls, ticking clocks, low murmurs of analysts discussing numbers that change people's lives. I was terrified the first week. Every mistake felt like it could cost a fortune, but I learned quickly. I stayed late to observe meetings, took notes on everything. Even asked questions most interns were too shy to ask. One evening, while I was finishing reports, Mr. Morrison himself stopped by my desk. You're still here. Yes, sir. I wanted to double-check the client data. He looked at me for a moment, then smiled. You remind me of myself at your age. Hungry and careful. That's a rare mix. Hungry and careful. The word stuck with me, because that's exactly what I was hungry for: a life that wasn't dependent on someone else's validation, careful enough to never let it slip through my fingers. When I went home for the holidays, the contrast hit me like cold air. Michelle was radiant, talking about her boutique internship and her upcoming fashion show. Mom and Dad glowed with pride. She's already making industry connections, Mom said, passing Michelle another serving of roast chicken. I cleared my throat. I'm interning at an investment company, Morrison & Associates. That sounds dull, Dad muttered. But stable, I suppose. Stable. The same word people use for things that don't matter much, but don't fall apart either. I smiled politely, then turned back to my plate. Michelle had a new boyfriend then. Someone named Justin, tall and confident, with the easy arrogance of people who always get what they want. I caught him glancing at me across the table, not in attraction, but amusement, like I was a novelty. "You're the finance one, right?" he asked. "Bet you're good with numbers." "I try," I said flatly. Michelle rolled her eyes. Sam takes everything too seriously. She's always been the save for later type. Their laughter filled the room like static. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd learned how to stay quiet without disappearing. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by the window in my childhood room. The same glow-in-the-dark stars from when I was little still clung to the ceiling. I stared at them, thinking of everything I had endured just to be invisible in peace. But that invisibility had become my armor. No expectations, no obligations, just focus. Back in college, Mr. Morrison began trusting me with more responsibilities, helping evaluate small business portfolios, building projections. I worked tirelessly, skipping weekends out with classmates to learn the markets. My grades stayed top of the class, but no one at home ever asked. Michelle's updates, however, arrived like clockwork. Michelle just got invited to a fashion gala. Michelle's design won a local award. Michelle might open her own boutique someday. Someday. Meanwhile, my someday was already under construction in spreadsheets, quiet offices, and my growing discipline. When graduation came, I wore a simple gray dress under my gown. My parents didn't attend. Michelle had a fashion event that same weekend, and apparently family couldn't be in two places at once. So Aunt Sarah came instead. After the ceremony, we stood outside the campus gates. She handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a silver pen engraved with my initials. "For signing your first contract," she said. I blinked back tears. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she interrupted gently. "You've built something from nothing, Dorothy. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small again." I hugged her. The scent of her perfume, faint jasmine, stayed with me long after she left. That summer, Mr. Morrison called me into his office. "We're impressed with your performance. I'd like to offer you a position here, full-time analyst. Starting salary $60,000. My heart skipped. That number felt impossibly large. "I accept," I said immediately. When I told my parents over the phone, Mom's response was simple. "That's nice, honey. At least now you can take care of yourself." Michelle chimed in from the background, laughing. "Don't forget to buy me something nice when you make your millions," I smiled to myself. "Oh, I will," I thought. "Just not in the way you think." That evening, I logged into my bank account. Between my savings and the trust fund, I had nearly $40,000 waiting my silent empire. I stared at the number, my reflection, ghosting across the laptop screen. This wasn't just money. It was proof that I could outgrow the story they'd written for me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt inevitable. The first few years of working at Morrison and Associates were nothing like I'd imagined. Success wasn't glamorous. It was spreadsheets at midnight, cold coffee, and learning how to survive in a world that didn't take young women seriously, especially quiet ones. But I thrived in silence. I always had. My routine became mechanical but oddly comforting. I'd wake at 6, take the bus downtown, walk past rows of polished shoes and power suits, and slip into the glass building where no one really noticed me until my results spoke louder than I did. By 24, I had earned the trust of senior analysts and was managing small client portfolios under supervision. I was methodical, never impulsive. When the markets dipped, I didn't panic. I recalculated. That discipline born from years of emotional neglect had turned into my greatest strength. At home, however, I was still the forgotten daughter. Sunday dinners were my reminder that no matter how high I climbed, I'd always be standing in Michelle's shadow. "Michelle's boutique is doing so well," Mom beamed one evening. "She got featured in a local magazine." "That's amazing," Dad added proudly. "She has her mother's taste." I smiled, slicing my chicken in silence. No one asked about my promotion, even though I'd mentioned it last week. When I finally spoke, it was almost accidental. I just closed my first independent portfolio. It performed above projection. Dad looked up, chewing slowly. "Good, good. As long as you're stable." That word again, stable. Like I was a middle step between risk and reward, never the destination. Michelle tossed her hair. "Sam's always been boring," she said playfully. "Even when we were kids, she'd rather count coins than play dolls." They all laughed. I did too. It was easier than explaining how those coins had built the foundation of everything I was becoming. Work became my refuge. While others saw a desk job, I saw chess moves, patterns, probabilities. Human behavior disguised as numbers. Every client's portfolio was a story: fear, greed, hope, desperation. I studied them all. That's how I learned that money, like love, reveals who people really are. Mr. Morrison, who once seemed distant, started calling me into meetings more often. You see the long game, he told me after I flagged a bad investment no one else noticed. You don't chase trends, you think in decades. His praise was simple, professional, but to me, it felt like oxygen. I began saving aggressively. No vacations, no designer clothes, just discipline. I moved into a small apartment with a college friend, Sarah, a different Sarah, not my aunt. We split bills, lived modestly. She teased me sometimes. Sam, you're 25. You should live a little. I smiled. I will, just not yet. Meanwhile, Michelle's life unfolded like a lifestyle blog. Every week, her social media showed something new: trips, dinners, luxury bags, her fiancé, Justin, smiling beside her. My parents proudly shared her posts like they were national achievements. She's getting married, Mom announced over the phone one night, her voice trembling with excitement. It's going to be such a beautiful ceremony. That's great, I said softly. She wants you as a bridesmaid. I hesitated. Of course. The wedding was lavish flowers imported from France, a string quartet, crystal chandeliers reflecting gold light. Michelle glowed in her custom gown. My parents looked radiant beside her like they were posing for a magazine cover. I stood to the side, holding my bouquet, smiling for pictures I wasn't really in. At the reception, Michelle found me by the buffet table. Don't disappear, Sam, she said teasingly. We want at least one photo where you're not hiding in the background. I'm not hiding, I said quietly, just observing. She laughed, thinking I was joking. Later that evening, during the father-daughter dance, I caught Mom wiping tears from her eyes. Dad looked proud, fulfilled. For a moment, I wondered what it felt like to be enough for them to be the reason for their smiles. But then I remembered the quiet strength I'd built from being overlooked. And I realized if I had been their favorite, I might never have learned how to stand alone. When I turned 26, the opportunity came. A medical startup approached Morrison and Associates seeking early investors. I read through their business plan obsessively, late nights, endless coffee highlighters, bleeding across the pages. It was risky, but my gut told me it was right. At work, I couldn't participate personally in client investments, but I began tracking the company privately. After months of research, I decided to put everything I had, $100,000 accumulated from my savings, and the matured trust fund, into it. It was the boldest decision of my life, and the loneliest. For months, I lived in quiet fear. Every news article, every market dip made my chest tighten. But I stayed calm. I had learned patience long ago while waiting for love that never came. 2 years later, I woke up to an email from the company. Their new technology had passed clinical approval. Shares skyrocketed. My initial investment turned into $2 million overnight. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, hands trembling, trying to process the numbers. I should have screamed, called someone, celebrated. Instead, I cried silent, exhausted tears, because no one in my family would believe that the boring one had just become a millionaire. I didn't quit my job right away. I kept showing up, kept pretending to be ordinary. But inside, everything had shifted. I bought a modest house, nothing flashy, upgraded my car quietly, and I invested again, this time in an AI startup, one that seemed futuristic and impossible. My colleagues thought it was insane. Too volatile, one warned. Too soon, another said. But I'd built my life on patience and intuition. I trusted both. When that company's value multiplied years later, I didn't feel lucky. I felt ready. At 30, I was worth over $24 million. But my parents still called to ask if I needed money for groceries. Michelle invited me to her kids' birthdays, where she'd brag about her renovated kitchen, while I smiled, pretending not to notice the irony. They still saw me as the simple one, the one who took taxis to family dinners because she can't afford a good car. And I let them, because sometimes invisibility is safer than being seen. I'd built a life of quiet triumphs, each one sweeter for having no applause. But I should have known every secret eventually finds its audience. I just didn't expect my reveal to happen over a plate of barbecue ribs. The day everything unraveled started out like any other family gathering. Too many voices, too much laughter that didn't reach the eyes, and the faint smell of overcooked ribs drifting through the air. I arrived late on purpose. I always did. It made things easier. I could slip in quietly, stay long enough to seem polite, and leave before the inevitable conversations about Michelle's perfect life began. "Sam, you made it," Mom called from the grill apron stained with sauce. "Grab a plate before Michelle's husband eats everything," I smiled. Wouldn't want to interrupt perfection. She didn't notice the edge in my voice. She never did. Michelle was already there, radiant as always, her designer sundress a little too bright for a backyard barbecue. Her husband Justin hovered nearby, beer in hand, talking too loudly about real estate. Their kids darted around the yard, squealing, while my parents looked on like proud royalty, overseeing a tiny empire. I took a seat at the far corner of the yard beneath the shade of the old oak tree, my usual spot. From here, I could watch the whole scene unfold like a movie I'd seen too many times. That's when he approached. A tall man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a blue polo and a look of polite confusion. "Excuse me," he said. "You're Dorothy Rogers, right?" "Dorothy." I froze. "Yes," I said carefully. "Why?" He smiled, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "I thought so. I'm David Chan Justin's cousin. You've been managing my portfolio for the past 2 years at Rogers Investments." For a moment, everything went still. The laughter, the chatter, even the wind seemed to pause. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I think you must be mistaken," I said quickly, standing up. "I don't." But David shook his head. "No, I'm certain. You're Dorothy Rogers, the founder. You helped me restructure my investments after the market crash last year." People were starting to glance over. Mom noticed first. "What's going on?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked over. Before I could answer, David, clueless to the grenade he'd just dropped, smiled proudly. "I was just telling Dorothy how grateful I am. She manages my investments. Best financial advisor I've ever had." Mom blinked. Investments, Dorothy Michelle, never one to miss drama, swooped in. "Wait, what's he talking about?" David laughed, pulling out his phone. "You don't know she owns Rogers Investments. Look, she's even been featured in Forbes." He typed quickly, and within seconds, I saw the moment everything shifted. Michelle's expression froze as her screen lit up. Her voice rose like an alarm. "Oh my God," she said. "It says here she's worth over $25 million. The world stopped. Dad dropped his fork. Mom's eyes went wide. Someone's kid cried in the background, but no one noticed. I wanted to melt into the ground. "25 million, Mom shouted. "How is that even possible?" Michelle's voice cracked. "You've been lying to us. You're rich, and you just what? Pretended to be poor." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Then I found my voice quiet but sharp. "I didn't lie. You just never asked." That only made it worse. Dad stood up, face red. "Don't play games, Dorothy. Family doesn't keep secrets like this." I felt my jaw tighten. Family also doesn't ignore one of their own for 30 years. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mom's voice trembled with indignation. "We've been struggling to help Michelle with her mortgage, and you're sitting on millions." I looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time in years. "You never asked how I was doing. Not once. You only ever called when Michelle needed something." Michelle's lip curled. "Oh, don't turn this into some sob story. You think money makes you better than us?" "No," I said quietly. "It just means I stopped waiting for your approval." For a second, no one spoke. The air was thick with disbelief, envy, and something uglier, shame. Then Dad's voice thundered. "You're being selfish. We're your family." I laughed bitterly. "Funny. You didn't say that when I was working double shifts at 19 to pay my tuition." People around us were pretending not to listen, but everyone was. Neighbors, cousins, even Justin looked uncomfortable. Michelle's kids tugged at her dress. "Mommy, why is Aunt Sam mad?" Michelle knelt down, whispering something I couldn't hear, but I saw the look she gave me, a mix of jealousy and humiliation. I took a deep breath and said the only thing that felt true. "I'm not mad. I'm just done pretending I needed any of you to become who I am." Then I picked up my bag, turned, and walked out. Behind me, I heard Michelle's voice breaking through the stunned murmurs. "She's been hiding this from us the whole time." I didn't look back. By the time I got home, I felt hollow. I sank onto the couch, still wearing my dress barbecue smoke clinging to my hair. My phone buzzed endlessly, calls from Mom Michelle, even Aunt Sarah. I didn't answer any of them. For 2 days, I let the messages pile up. "How could you keep this secret? We're your family. We need to talk." But I couldn't face them yet. The truth had finally come out, and instead of feeling free, I felt exposed, like every part of me I'd built in private had been ripped open under a spotlight. When I finally checked my voicemail, one message stopped me cold. It was Aunt Sarah. Sweetheart, she said softly, your parents called me. They're hurt, but they're also scared. They don't understand what they've done, not really. Don't shut them out completely, Sam. You only get one family. Don't let resentment build into something you can't come back from. Her voice cracked at the end, and for a moment I hated that she was right. Because as much as I wanted to erase them from my life, the truth was simpler and sadder. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn their attention, and now that I finally had it, it was for all the wrong reasons. 2 days after the barbecue, the knocking started. Not the polite kind, but the kind that doesn't stop until you answer. When I opened the door, my mother's perfume hit me first. Sharp, familiar, suffocating. Michelle stood beside her, arms crossed, and Dad was right behind them, jaw clenched. They looked around before stepping inside, eyes darting over the high ceilings, the marble floor, the art on the walls. My house wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, the physical proof of every long night and quiet triumph they had ignored. Michelle whistled low. Wow, so this is where you've been hiding all your money. Her voice was playful, but her eyes burned. I forced a smile. Coffee, tea. Or would you rather start with the accusations? Mom gasped. Dorothy? Don't speak to us like that. Then stop talking to me like I owe you something. Dad raised a hand, his voice heavy. Sit down. We're not here to fight. But they were. I could feel it in the air, thick with unspoken blame. We sat in the living room. Michelle's gaze darted from the rug to the fireplace, her mind calculating the cost of everything she saw. So what's the number now? She asked. 25,030,000. I took a deep breath. Why does it matter? It matters because we're your family, Mom snapped. You've been keeping secrets, living in luxury while you what? I cut in. While you bought. Michelle a house, paid for her wedding. Funded her boutique. The silence that followed was heavy. Dad leaned forward. That's not the point. You could have shared. Helped your sister when she struggled. I laughed softly, bitterness slipping through. You mean when her store lost money because she spent more than she made? Michelle's face flushed. I made that business work. After how many loans I shot back. After how many times Mom and Dad bailed you out. Enough, Mom, shouted, her voice trembling. We raised you both. We did our best. You should be grateful. I stared at her, the woman who used to cut Michelle's birthday cakes with perfect symmetry while forgetting to light my candles. Grateful for what I asked quietly, for being invisible, for watching every bit of love and pride flow one way. Her lips parted, but no words came. Even Michelle looked startled, maybe because for once I wasn't the quiet one. The argument went on for nearly half an hour. Their words, my words, sharp cold, overlapping like broken glass. Finally, Dad stood. This isn't about the past anymore. What's done is done. You have the chance to make things right now. Help your family. It was almost funny how quickly love became a negotiation. I folded my hands in my lap. So that's why you're really here. Michelle shifted in her seat. My boutique is in trouble again, she said finally. Sales have dropped since the new mall opened. The rent is high. The kids need school fees. Mom jumped in. And your father's car broke down last week. The repairs are expensive. We thought maybe I'd fix everything I finished for her. Their silence was my answer. I looked at each of them, trying to feel anger, but all I felt was exhaustion. You only come to me when something's broken. Dad's tone softened, the way it used to when he wanted me to agree. Dorothy, it's not about money. It's about family. You're in a position to help us. We're not asking for much. I stood up slowly. You're asking for everything. Mom's eyes flashed. Everything. We gave you life. And I gave myself everything else, I said, my voice trembling but steady. Because when you stopped seeing me, I learned to see myself. The air went still. No one spoke. Even Michelle, who always had something to say, was silent. Finally, I pointed toward the door. I think you should go. They left without another word, though Michelle muttered something about selfish people under her breath as she walked out. When the door shut, the silence that followed was deafening. I sat on the couch and stared at the walls of my house, the home I'd built from nothing. It suddenly felt too quiet, too large. That night, Aunt Sarah called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me she already knew. Dorothy, she said softly, your parents called me. Of course they did, I murmured. They were upset, confused. They're always confused when I stop being convenient. She sighed. They made mistakes, yes. But don't let your anger trap you. You work too hard to build peace. Don't let bitterness ruin it. Her voice cracked. You only get one family, sweetheart. Whether they deserve you or not, they're yours. After we hung up, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words in my head. Maybe she was right. Maybe cutting them off completely would make me just like them, cold, dismissive, blind to love, unless it looked a certain way. But forgiveness wasn't easy when the wounds never really healed. For weeks, I stayed quiet. No calls, no visits. Then one afternoon, I saw an old photo on my desk, Michelle and me, as kids wearing matching dresses at some long-forgotten party. I was smiling too hard, trying too much. She looked effortlessly happy. I ran my fingers across the photo and something inside me softened. The next day, I got in my car and drove to my parents' house. Michelle's car was already in the driveway. Dad opened the door, surprised. "Dorothy, can I come in?" We sat in the living room, the same one where years ago I used to sit quietly while they praised Michelle's grades and scolded me for wanting attention. "I've been thinking," I said finally. "You were right about one thing. I am in a position to help." Mom's eyes lit up instantly, but I raised a hand. "On my terms." They all froze. "I'll give each of you $1,000 a month. That's it. For emergencies, maybe more. But that's the limit." Dad frowned. "That's all," Mom whispered. "After all we've done." "After all I've done," I corrected gently. "This isn't repayment. It's mercy." They exchanged glances, resentment, confusion, pride. But then something shifted. Dad nodded slowly. "Thank you, Dorothy. That's generous." Michelle swallowed hard. "I'll save it for the kids." Mom's voice trembled. "We've been talking since that day. We realized we weren't fair to you growing up." I studied her face. There was something new there, not guilt exactly, but effort. The smallest flicker of sincerity. Maybe Aunt Sarah had been right again. "I'm not promising we'll ever be perfect," I said quietly. "But maybe we can start over." Mom reached out, hesitated, then took my hand. Her touch was warm, trembling. "I'd like that." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like background noise. I felt seen. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first step towards something I'd stopped believing in long ago: family that didn't hurt to love. After that afternoon, something inside me shifted, not all at once, but in quiet, hesitant ripples. For the first time in years, our family dinners didn't feel like emotional minefields. The air was still heavy, yes, but now it carried something unfamiliar: restraint, maybe even respect. Mom began texting me about simple things, recipes, photos of Michelle's kids, little updates about Dad's garden. They weren't grand gestures, but they were attempts. And after a lifetime of silence, attempts felt like progress. One Sunday, I decided to host dinner at my place. The same house where they had once walked in to judge me now smelled of roasted garlic and baked bread. I didn't hire caterers. I cooked everything myself, simple dishes, familiar flavors, the kind Mom used to make when we still felt like a family. When they arrived, Michelle whistled again, but this time the tone was different. "You've got good taste, Sam. It's elegant." I smiled. "Guess I learned from someone who cared more about design than budgets." She chuckled, rolling her eyes. "Touché." Mom handed me a small box chocolate truffles from her favorite store downtown. "We thought you'd like these." "I do," I said and meant it. We ate. We laughed awkwardly. We avoided old wounds. Every now and then, Dad would bring up a stock he'd heard about, pretending to be casual. "You think this company's worth investing in?" I smirked. "Maybe. But you'd have to promise not to panic when the market dips." He laughed, embarrassed, but trying. For once, I didn't feel like the afterthought. A few months later, my parents' car broke down. This time, they didn't ask for help. Mom simply mentioned it in passing on the phone, trying to sound unconcerned. I thought about it that night, standing by my window, watching the city lights flicker. The next day, I called the dealership and had a modest, reliable car delivered to their driveway. I didn't tell them in advance. When Mom called, her voice cracked between gratitude and disbelief. "Dorothy, we can't accept this." "Yes, you can," I said softly. "Just promise me one thing. Don't see it as payback. What should we see it as? Peace." There was a long pause, and then a sound I hadn't heard from her in decades: tears. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "We really don't deserve you." I smiled faintly. "I know, but I'm trying to stop keeping score." Business at Rogers Investments was booming. Within 2 years, we were managing over $100 million in client assets. Magazines still called. Interviews, conferences, podcasts. I was suddenly the face of financial resilience, though the irony always made me laugh. They didn't know the real story. They saw success. I saw survival. Every time someone called me self-made, I thought of Aunt Sarah's steady hand guiding me, of the 12-year-old girl clutching her first check while her family looked past her. No one is truly self-made. We're built from both the love we receive and the love we're denied. One weekend, Michelle and her kids visited me. Her daughter Emily ran through the living room, eyes wide at everything. "Aunt Sam, is this your house?" "It's so big." I knelt down, smiling. "It's big enough for you to get lost in if you're not careful," she giggled. "Mom says you're really good with money. Can you teach me?" Michelle's eyes softened, and for once there was no trace of envy. "Maybe she can teach both of us." We laughed. But behind her smile, I saw something honest admiration. Not resentment, not comparison, just pride. That night after they left, I sat by the window with a glass of wine. The city below shimmered with the restless hum of ambition, something I knew too well. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. Months later, Aunt Sarah came to visit. She looked older, smaller somehow, but her eyes still carried that familiar, sharp warmth. "Look at you," she said, scanning my office. "From $10,000 to an empire." I laughed softly. "All because of a Christmas envelope." She smiled knowingly. "You made the choices, Dorothy. I just gave you a push." We sat in silence for a while before she asked, "How are things with your parents?" "Better," I said truthfully. "Not perfect, but real. That's all families can be," she replied. "Real." Before leaving, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "You did it, kiddo. You turned their silence into music." Sometimes I still think about that barbecue the day everything came crashing down. If it hadn't happened, maybe we'd still be pretending. Maybe I'd still be visiting every few months, sitting in the corner, letting their voices fill the space that should have been mine. But exposure, as painful as it was, forced truth into the open. And truth, even ugly truth, has a strange way of setting people free. Now, when I look at my family, I don't see villains or victims. I see people shaped by their own insecurities, their own blind spots. We all hurt each other in different ways. Some wounds never fully heal, but they stop bleeding once you stop pressing them. Last week during dinner, Dad raised a glass and said, "To Dorothy for teaching us that strength doesn't always make noise." Everyone clinked glasses and Michelle winked at me across the table. I laughed. Careful. Compliments from this family are rare. I might frame that one. We all laughed, and for once it felt genuine. When I walked them to their car that night, Mom hugged me before getting in. "I'm proud of you, Sam," she said quietly. "Not just for what you've built, but for who you are." The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't cry. I just nodded, holding her a second longer than I meant to. Later that night, alone in my quiet house, I stood before the old framed photo of me and Michelle as children. I used to hate that picture, how she stood in front, smiling wide, while I lingered behind, half cut out of the frame. Now I see it differently. I wasn't background, I was foundation. And maybe that's what life is learning, to stop begging to be seen, and instead learning how to see yourself clearly enough that no one can erase you again. I took the photo down, wiped the dust from its glass, and smiled. I finally understood what all those years had taught me. Success isn't revenge. It's peace. And love, even late, even flawed, is still worth forgiving for.